Now that you've seen the different ways jQuery can be loaded into your web pages, let's move on and jump into some of the jQuery API and some of the things you need to know right up front to work with it properly. One of the very first things you'll want to use is the ready function. Now, as a preface to what we're going to cover later, you might hear me say function, or I might even say method, which is a little more applicable to the .NET world, but they're both synonymous with each other. So the ready function is used when you want to detect when the page is loaded. Now it's different though than the load that happens with a standard browser. And the difference is that with the ready function, when the DOM is ready and you can now interact with the HTML, that's when this one fires. Now that may mean that all the images haven't actually loaded yet in the page, but it gives you the opportunity to start interacting with the page a little bit earlier because you don't have to wait for the entire page to be loaded, including the images. So it's called once the DOM hierarchy is loaded, as you see here, but again, before all the images have loaded, and all you do is first reference your jQuery JS file, just like we did earlier, either through the CDN or through just a local one with the script tag. Then under that, you'll put the script block that you see here, and from there, we're simply going to go in and tell jQuery to handle the ready. Now the way this works is this is your first introduction to what's called a jQuery selector. Now we're going to talk about selectors. We'll have a whole module on that, and that's the next module, but I'm going to introduce them briefly here. Anytime you see a dollar followed by something in the parentheses here, such as an object or a string, then that's going to put what's called a jQuery wrapper around that particular object. So in this case, we're putting a jQuery wrapper around the document object. The dollar is also the same as the keyword jQuery. I even showed briefly that earlier when we looked at some of the jQuery script, actual logic and code that was in it. The dollar is just an alias, and you can actually substitute that for different things, but out of the box, most jQuery developers will just go with that because it's less typing, it's easier to work with. So anytime you see dollar, think jQuery. So from the dollar, the parenthesis, to the end parenthesis here is simply a wrapper around the document object, and that wrapper is a new object that gets returned, and it exposes this ready function. Now ready needs to know what to call once everything's loaded, once the DOM is loaded and we're ready to go. So you can either call an inline function, which is what's been being done here, or you can call a separate function, a callback function. So you have an anonymous function that can be called, or you can have a name function, either one. Now again, most jQuery developers, and including myself, leverage the inline functions, the anonymous functions like this one, where the function is defined, but you'll notice there's no name given to the function. Normally in JavaScript, you'd of course say the function and then the name of the function, and then put the parentheses. Well, this provides a nice compact syntax to handle the ready function. This function here starts with the brackets here, ends with the brackets here, and now we can do whatever we'd like to run with the logic. You'll typically, although not always, put this ready function in most of your pages in situations where you need to do something right when it loads. Now, if you're going to perform a function when the button's clicked or some other thing, then it may be you don't have a ready function, but I find that a lot of my screens, I'll put this in it. Alright, so very, very simple once you understand that the dollar simply represents that we're going to do a jQuery wrapper around the object, in this case document. That exposes a new object which has a ready function. Once that ready function executes, we're going to call this function that you see right in here. So let's do a quick demo of how that works and show you what you need to do there. Alright, so I have a web page that you saw earlier already loaded. This references jQuery. And if we go in and just save it as is and run it up in the browser, it's not going to be real impressive because there's currently jQuery's loaded, but it's not really doing anything. So you can see it just says my jQuery enabled page. But let's go ahead and now integrate in the ready function so we can do something here. So right below this script, I'm going to come in and we'll say script. We'll do the same thing, text/JavaScript. Go ahead and end that script block. And then in here, we can now wire up our ready function. Now the nice thing is this works cross-browser. You don't have to worry about doing the load that you typically would do and then worry about cross-browser issues. So we're going to say we want to do either jQuery document like that, but as I mentioned, a lot of people, in fact most people, will just do the jQuery sort of the short syntax way. We're going to put a wrapper around the document object. That object that gets returned now has a ready function, and when ready's called, what do? Well, we could come in and say ready callback if we wanted and leave it at that, and then we could come down in here and make a function called ready callback and do all that. Now I really never do that, to be quite honest. Instead what I'll do is I'll come in like I showed you earlier and we'll simply put it in line. Keeps it more compact. I also think from my perspective, and I think from a lot of jQuery developers' perspectives, it keeps it all easy to maintain because we know that when the document is ready, we're just going to do whatever code's right here, so you don't have to go looking for a separate callback function. So to keep it real simple to start, let's just say alert ready function called, and we're going to save it and we're ready to go. So let's go ahead and run that now in the browser, and you can see ready function is now called with our alert. Very, very simple to get started. Now that's very, very intro for jQuery, but it's one of the key things you want to do off the bat, and that's kind of how it works to help get started. Now what we'll be doing in the later modules is we'll be using this ready function. Instead of just doing a simple alert, we'll go in and do things like find divs, change styles, and so on and so forth. Those types of things. Alright, so that's how you get started with the ready function. One of the very first things you'll want to do.